Stories from Real Life is a production of Media Well Done, LLC.
Welcome back to Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards. Today's guest is Jeff Gomez, President and CEO of Starlight Runner Entertainment. Now, you may not know his name the way you know Halo, Avatar, Pirates of the Caribbean, or Spider-Man, but that is exactly what makes this conversation so fascinating. For 25 years, Jeff has been one of the people studios call when a story becomes too big for one movie, one game, one comic, or one platform. His work is about helping creators build with mythology, structure, history, rules, and emotional meaning. This is Stories from Real Life, and today's story is Jeff Gomez's. Why Fans May Save Hollywood.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thank you for joining us for the podcast where real stories are so much more interesting than fiction, even if the real stories are about fiction. Today's guest is Jeff Gomez, President and CEO of Starlight Runner Entertainment. You may not know the name the way you know Halo, Avatar, Pirates of the Caribbean, or Spider-Man, but if you know those titles, you've been exposed to Jeff's work. We'll also talk about his new crime thriller, Deep Down, his forthcoming book, The 10 Commandments of Corporate Narrative, and his ongoing work exploring artificial intelligence as a new storytelling medium. Jeff Gomez, welcome to Stories from Real Life.
So good to be here, Melvin. Awesome.
Good to have you. So what does it feel like to be one of the people behind the mythology of those huge franchises, but not necessarily have people know your name or who you are?
In a way, it reminds me of when I was a kid and used to do the homework for, the jocks in high school.
Did you really do that?
Once in a while. I needed protection. No, look, it's a privilege to be able to work with stories that are going to be enjoyed by millions and millions of people, especially the specific kind of work that I do, which is to really go deep into these worlds, these universes, and find out what makes them distinct and what kind of wisdom, how exactly they are offering something that lifts the audience up and makes them excited and builds a zest for life, to make sure that information, that code is in the property, especially as it spreads out across all these different media, which happens a lot these days, is something that I truly enjoy doing.
Okay, that's awesome. So I'm curious what your parents and teachers thought about your creativity when you were a kid.
Well, I always was a little bit of the odd one, right? I grew up in the 60s and 70s as a little kid, and back then, to have highly specified interests that weren't, things like sports or standard academics was a little bit unusual, right? So, the best I got are kind of benign nods and, oh, you're a good writer, do more. Once in a while, I'd have a teacher that truly recognized something was going on and really encouraged me. And that made all the difference in the world.
So what do you think those teachers would say now or would think now?
I've stayed in touch with them, Melvin. Wow. I owe a great debt to them. I'm going to see one of them, Shelley, this weekend, and because I do every year, I go upstate to New York and thank her because she truly was deeply influential in getting me to write and understand literature and writing, move my interests beyond dinosaurs and giant monsters. So I know what they think. They're proud, and thrilled and happy.
That's great. So about your work, when you first look at a story universe, what are you really looking for?
even the biggest universes, Star Wars, Marvel, Harry Potter, they were originated by one or a very few individuals. So the first thing I think about, Melvin, is what was this person thinking? What did they have to say that moved them to create something that would transcend time and earn a lot of money? What happened to them as kids? What did they have to surmount in order to have the talent, but also the wisdom to create such a fabulous work? Once I understand that, I generally understand the story world, and I make sure to defend and protect that central artistic integrity to that world, even as it becomes a comic book or a video game or a novel or things other than movies and TV shows.
So is every narrator or every creator who you work with, once you get to know their own origin story, is it always consistent that you can figure out their ideas for their blooming world building?
100%. Never fails. Never fails. That is, if it's a truly transcendent work, and by transcendent I mean that everyone in the world can look at it and get it, understand it, and even love it. There's a power to storytelling that transcends cultures. There's a power to storytelling that makes people want to hear the story over and over and over again, or variations on that narrative. And that is rooted in an artistic vision.
Okay, that's really powerful. So when a studio or game company calls you, what problem are they usually trying to solve?
Well, quite often, these companies have tigers by the tail. They don't quite understand why this property has become so powerful and so compelling to so many people. And what they do quite often is that they rely on new artists, new storytellers to come in and take the intellectual property and give us their version of the story. Sometimes that's successful. A lot of times it's not. Why? Because their version is too far, it's drifted too far away from the original vision, the original intent, the original meaning. And audiences can tolerate that a little bit, but eventually it starts to float away. So my job is to be a kind of architect, to make sure that the structure is sound, and to be able to give the core blueprints to the various artists and storytellers and licensees, because licensing is a very big business, right? So they need to understand the blueprints to create things that are true to the essence of that original story world.
Okay, and as I mentioned at the top, you worked across massive worlds like Halo, Avatar, Pirates of the Caribbean, and Spider-Man. How important are the rules, timelines, and the internal logic to make the fictional world feel real to those who are consuming the product?
Well, like I said before, the most important thing is the essence of the artistic vision, the central messaging, the themes, the archetypes, the aspect of the world that fulfills deep inner wishes, inner desires. We call them aspirational drivers. So we make sure to get that done first. Then, yes, there is an integrity to these worlds, right? You don't want people running around in the world of Pirates of the Caribbean with laser guns. It's just not going to work. So we decide, based on everything that we're able to absorb, we it's not even a decision. We are discerning. We're finding out what those fantastical structures are that hold the world together. And those are rules. A lot of us fanboys call it canon or canonicity. What is officially a part of this world? How does it work? In the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, there are gods, but they tend to be nautical gods. we're not going to see just any old god running around. The god has to have some relationship to the sea, and that's something that we help Disney to kind of hold to. For Halo, we want to make sure that Master Chief holds a certain integrity to himself and conducts himself in very specific ways, so that we as an audience maintain respect for him, even though he has to do some pretty tough things and make some harsh decisions.
Wow. All right. I'm going to make an assumption before I ask my question.
Sure.
Hopefully my assumption is correct. When your name is included in the credits, is it at the front end of the movie or in ending credits?
Quite often it's not included at all.
Okay, so my assumption was incorrect then.
Well, at first, there wasn't even a name for what it is that I did. The thing that I came to realize was that people who are able to interact with many divisions of a company, which it was my responsibility, and people who are maintaining the integrity of a brand, whether that's Coca-Cola or, Halo or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, that's a producer. And so I joined the Producers Guild of America, and together we created a credit for what it is that I do, transmedia producer, and that's the credit that I earn. Sometimes I'm working directly with studio executives, and so that means that I don't show up in the credits because I'm not assigned by the producers and directors of the movie. I'm assigned by the studio heads, and I'm working for them to make sure that there's this integrity. And that sometimes leaves me off the credits in movies.
Okay.
But more recently, I've shown up here and there.
Nice. So pretty soon it'll be Pirates of the Caribbean featuring the works of Jeff Gomez.
Well, pretty soon I actually teamed with Ashley Eckstein. She plays Ahsoka Tano in the Star Wars animated series. She's wonderful, and together we created a new intellectual property that we pitched to Disney, and Disney accepted it. So that's in production right now, and that will have the names right up front.
Nice.
Very, very exciting. I think they'll announce it formally later this year.
Will that be the biggest day of your life?
One of them. Sure, absolutely.
Right, so,
I'm very excited.
So something like this, when you enter an existing franchise, how do you respect what the owners want and expanding it while keeping in mind what the fans already love about it?
Melvin, those are good questions. Maybe you're a little nerdier than we thought. That is not an easy job to do. There are many cooks in that kitchen, and many people to please, including me as a fan, because quite usually I am a fan of what it is that I'm working on, right? So the trick is this. Number one, be right. So there is a kind of science, a technique to being able to deconstruct story and understand the fundamental components, the same way an auto mechanic can take apart an engine and understand all the different pieces of it. A lot of people think that's magic, but really it's a methodology, it's a technique. And we have a good one at Starlight Runner. So we demonstrate that, but at the same time, we're interviewing everyone. Every major stakeholder is going to sit down with us and talk to us about their interpretation of the material and their desires for the material and their job on the material. When you do that, it's actually kind of not that different from talking the jock into making sure that you're going to be safe on the playground. It's understanding their needs and listening to them as a kind of friend, and then asking of them to help to maintain the integrity of this thing, this intellectual property, which, Melvin, is greater than all of us. These things that I've worked on will last well beyond our lifetimes. We serve them, and they hold wisdom, they hold myth, and they need to move on the way ancient myths have lasted all these centuries. Do you see? So once everyone understands that, we work in tandem, and usually it turns out pretty nice.
Okay. So you've argued that fan communities may be the key to saving legacy media. What do you mean by that?
Sure. Well, legacy media, is media to me that basically was born from the year 2000 and earlier. So legacy media is everything from photography to television, radio, feature films, and novels, things like that. And things are moving so quickly now, Melvin, that some of those media are challenged, right? Not too many people reading newspapers and good old AM FM radio. Not too much of that left either. So what is going to last? What's going to transcend? Well, it is the thing that's going to be able to continue delivering what it is that we love and delivering it well. So we need to listen to fans and not just algorithmically, which, some of these streamers, that's what they're doing. We need to listen to what it is that they desire, what it is that they are experiencing right now, which is kind of rough, Melvin. In my lifetime, I haven't seen what's going on today too often. There's a lot of stress and anxiety. What's going to resonate with these young people? What's going to give them what they need to calm themselves and gain strength so that they can affect some change, and improve our situation? Those stories are, if they are distributed through legacy media, are going to be what maintains legacy media.
Okay, so let's shift over to your crime thriller, Deep Down. So tell us about the world that story takes place in.
Melvin, as a kid, I often didn't feel like I belonged where I was, and so I was on the move a lot. And back then, in the 1970s, there wasn't that much parental supervision. So where am I going to go? Now that I've moved to Flushing, Queens from the Lower East Side, where am I going to go where a couple of dollars can get me a hot dog and 4 monster movies in a row? Well, I'm going to have to get on that 7 train and go to Times Square, right? And traveling throughout the New York City subway system, the MTA, the Metropolitan Transit Authority, was always just so fascinating to me. Admittedly, I have a little of that OCD thing going on, and the information that was zooming past me actually was kind of soothing in a strange way, and also, of course, peering into the darkness. What's down there? Who's down there? What's happening? It seemed to me, and it turns out I was right, there are people down there, people who live there, and I'm not talking about subway workers. How do they live? How do they support one another? How do they maintain themselves? What do they do when they're persecuted? That's the essence of what's going on in this Deep Down comic book series. I invented that world with some partners, Dana Kay and Mark, and we hired some wonderful writers who are very experienced in comic book and graphic novel writing. Steele Philippek and Fabian Nicieza. Fabian has written many, many comic books and sold tens of millions of them. And that's Deep Down. That's a series that's going to preview at San Diego Comic-Con in July, and then run as a series starting in the fall.
Okay. So earlier you talked about a creator's origin story being the foundation of whatever worlds they're able to create later in life. So having a gritty crime thriller, even though you were soothed by the passing scenes and sounds of the subway, was there any kind of a fear of crime under there that might impact you?
Melvin, in my life, crime was a fact of life. Violence in the streets, the tremendous economic disparity that was experienced by myself and the people around me. I grew up in the projects. We were in poverty. As a Puerto Rican in New York, that wasn't a particularly positive thing to be, and I ran into racism. I ran into fists. I ran into anger and resentment. And on top of all of that, I was a little bit weird to begin with. I looked funny and talked about things that people don't usually talk about. And so, I got the occasional elbow to the head and a knee to the groin and so forth. And so crime is a concern, but although the genre is crime thriller, it's a police investigation and so forth, what it is really about is that there are people who are above and there are people who are below. And some of those people are neurodivergent. That's a running theme through the comic book series that I haven't gotten to write about too much. And I'm deeply, obviously sympathetic to neurodivergent people. I think they have points of view that are astounding, really, and that we need to listen to more. Maybe there's a reason they're around, right? So those themes are what I cared to infuse into Deep Down.
Okay. So after working on so many major properties, what felt different about building something that was entirely yours?
Yeah. In recent years, I've gotten to do that, Melvin, and it's astounding, a pleasure. Some have asked me, what took you so long? You got to work on all these, amazing projects. Couldn't you have thrown one out yourself? And the fact of the matter is I have, but under the guise of other people's brands. I contributed a whole lot to something called Magic the Gathering, a trading card game that really alluded to this greater universe. And I helped to invent a lot of the characters and lands and storylines, history in that game. It was incredibly satisfying and it earned me some money. But now I've just become bold enough to be honest with you, Melvin. I was shy. I allowed my differences to marginalize me a little bit. And now I've had it. So I'm stepping up. I'm stepping
You're
forward.
not going to take it anymore.
Well, it's time to tell my stories. And that's what's happening right now with the project with Disney, with Ashley, and with Deep Down.
Okay.
And maybe some more.
Okay, and you've got a forthcoming book called The 10 Commandments of Corporate Narrative. What is corporate narrative, and why does it matter? When
I work on these story worlds for the Disney company or Sony Pictures or 20th Century Fox years ago, I would tell them, you have to understand that you are the owner and custodian of this brand, of this world, and you have to maintain its integrity. And so you cannot completely turn it over to a third party. What other company would do that? Would Coca-Cola go to some third party and say, invent a new soda for us? No, they'd buy you and then make sure that what you're doing is in line with the Coca-Cola brand, right? So it's the same with those story worlds. And once I realized that, what I actually realized, Melvin, was that I was asking a huge corporation to show some integrity, and to be able to stand up to scrutiny by its customers and to behave accordingly. And if you make mistakes, you have to talk about the mistake and how you're going to fix it. And so a longtime advisor and friend, Alan Berkson, came to me and said, you should do this for companies, for corporations, because they need to learn these lessons, especially in an age where anybody can say anything now. And that can spread very rapidly and impact brands and impact, how much money your company's making super, super fast, right? So I worked with Alan to create a kind of corporate version as if your corporation is a story world, right? And gave them a kind of instruction book to maintain the integrity of their company and their brands, their products and brands. And that's called the 10 Commandments of Successful Corporate Narratives. And that just came out. It's just out now on Amazon.
Okay, I'll make sure I include a link in the show notes for people who are interested in getting a copy of that. So through the mythic field, you've been writing about AI as a new storytelling medium. What do you mean by storytelling medium for AI purposes?
Melvin, it might be a touch controversial, but I've been around a long time, so I can afford to toss these things off. You know, when computers arrived, especially ones that were connected to one another in some strange network, I looked at that and said to myself, the world is going to change. There's going to be a very significant difference between yesterday and tomorrow. This happened again with mobile phones. You know, these are so significant that the way our minds work is going to shift, is going to change to integrate this technology, this tool into our everyday lives. It's happening again with generative AI and various LLMs and anything related to artificial intelligence. So what is it? I believe in many ways that artificial intelligence is a medium unto itself, right? Just like mobile technology, just like television, radio, mobile. It's a medium that will be able to generate content, and the way that we interact with that content is going to be different from anything that we've ever experienced before. And here's the one reason why. It can kind of listen to you. All right, think about that, Melvin. This device, this tool, could kind of hear you, understand what you're saying, and say something back that you can interpret as meaningful. Okay? Ain't nothing like that before. Nothing. Okay? So think of the storytelling that you can do with a medium like that. I can go into that world and start talking to characters. Me, myself, not an avatar that I'm controlling, but me. What's that like? That's kind of like role play. That's kind of like live action, immersive worlds, not just filled with things that I can kill, but filled with things that I can talk to, work things out with, hang out with, talk about with my troubles, relate to. That's something that is very striking to me. It also, I think, requires a great deal of responsibility in terms of us as storytellers who are utilizing that medium. You know, already we've heard of relationships that are going on between human beings and AI kind of characters. And that could be very, very positive, but also very destructive and isolating. If this thing is never going to give you any trouble, why wouldn't you hang out with it instead of a human being? So we have to be wary of that. But also, my gosh, the potential is remarkable.
All right. So for creators, is AI more of a threat or a shortcut?
For me, neither. Listen, what you're looking at in terms of AI's capabilities right now, think back when we first saw these little JPEGs on the internet. Those first few years of the internet, and you can look like a fuzzy image, and it's all filled with dots and so forth. Mm-hmm. That's where we are with AI. That's where we are. So it won't be long, and I do have a little inside knowledge, Melvin. It won't be long before we will be given the tools to essentially fabricate our own creations. through artificial intelligence, which means that it isn't us typing in a prompt and suddenly a pop song comes out that it invents based on a sentence or two that we're writing. It will be able to work with us to create each piece of music that goes into the compilation of that song, just as we'll be able to build sets for our movies, special effects, and things like that, piece by piece. So it won't be something that is lifted from somewhere or copied from somewhere. It can emerge from our specific artistic vision. That's what I call the mythic field. And that's what I'm helping to build, this notion that the quintessence of you and your aesthetics and your storytelling and your desires and your childhood traumas, all get poured into this thing that then, if you're building a world, that field inhabits that world and maintains your artistic integrity as it spreads out and becomes accessible to a participant or many participants or millions of participants.
Okay, so based on your insider knowledge, if you're able to talk about anything like this, will AI be able to, let's say, create a hologram of a deceased person for you to maybe have a conversation with?
The answer is yes, and it's already happened. Yep. It's these are in operation. These are occurring around the world. The United States isn't the only one moving fast. This is occurring. There's a company called Deep Fusion that is doing stunning work with regard to actualizing characters that you can look at and have a conversation with. Really, really amazing.
All right. So what do you want people to understand about the invisible work behind the stories that they love?
What I would love for people to understand is that invisible work harkens back to the earliest stories that have ever been told. And those early stories were roadmaps to survival. So that's the purpose of story, to lift our lives, to allow for us to persist. And the only thing that's changed, Melvin, is that we are now intrinsically interconnected. Millions and millions of us, billions of us even, are interconnected. So the shift that we have to think about is a shift away from the central conceit of direct conflict. We must shift away from that. Why? Because direct conflict is the assertion of right on wrong, generally, right? And that's a binary. And we are seeing that binaries are getting us into trouble, because everyone has a voice, everyone has a perspective, and if all of us assert our right on one another's wrong, we are going to get into a tremendous mess. We might have already started, right? Mm-hmm. So the stories of today need to provide us with a roadmap to reconciling our language with the language of others, our perspectives with the perspectives of others, right? Those are the kinds of stories that we need. Narratives that are systemic, not good and evil. I live here, you live there. Maybe there's someone who is taking advantage of a flaw in the system that's harming us. We need to fix the flaw. If you knock off the villain, right? If you destroy the bad guy who's taking advantage of us, tomorrow there's going to be another one, right? Just like that. Mm-hmm. So forget about it. Believe me, there's plenty to try and stop you from actually affecting systemic repair. But our narratives need to at least make us aware of the possibility that we can fix the system as opposed to destroying the antagonist. And that map is a map of reconciliation, the ability for us to join forces to repair things, because we are the human race. We're capable. We can do it. We can do it. So let's provide our audience with patterns and maps to be able to do just that.
Okay. I just have a couple of regular questions before we start to wind down the conversation, and then I have a quick lightning round I'd like to have to finish it off. All right. So what gives you hope about the future of storytelling?
I'm seeing more systemic narratives. I'm seeing stories about people who are grappling with complex issues and who are surmounting their differences with others to try and solve the problem. That gives me a lot of hope. The fact that I'm able to tell my stories with companies like Disney is just awesome. They chose me, fantasy science fiction boy, when they had Star Wars and Marvel. That means that they're looking for something different and new that has maybe a slightly different kind of message to it, a more complex message for a more complex world. That really gives me encouragement.
Okay. So what worries you the most about storytelling, the future of storytelling?
We are right now, imprisoned by language, and there are people out there who understand that language can be used as a weapon, and they can weaponize it. They can leverage our anxiety, our dissatisfaction, our anger, and turn us against one another. And that's a genuine cause for concern, because it has reached a level of intensity that I haven't seen in a long, long time, Melvin. And the people who think that they're not going to be touched by it very soon will be touched by it. And so I'm hoping that some of our younger friends are building strength within themselves to be able to take effective action and to alter our navigational course, if you get my drift.
Okay. That all makes sense. All right. So for this final lightning round, I'm going to ask you some short questions. You just throw back some short answers at me. All right. One fictional world you wish you had helped build.
I've gotten to work on many of the ones that I could have only fantasized about. I love Godzilla, and so I wish I could have been involved in all that. It'd be a little different than what it is, with my taste. And of course, James Bond is awesome, and I'd love for that character to live in a more complex and intricate world, and still be able to do his thing.
Okay. Best example of a world building.
Wow. I'm watching a series right now on MGM called From, From, that is a highly intricate mythology and story world. And it really seems to be carefully thought out. And it's scary and brilliant. So I love that. Widow's Bay also, by the way, is a much more simpler story world that also is rather elegant and intriguing.
Okay. Most overrated storytelling buzzword.
Hero's journey storytelling is far too commonly used today to refer to a very simple cycle of adventure. The hero leaves the home, is mentored, fights a bunch of things, grabs the treasure, confronts the bad guy, becomes enlightened somehow, and returns home with the treasure. I'm not too fond of that. Simply, the Campbellian, the Joseph Campbell hero's journey is actually highly sophisticated and beautiful, but its simplification, it's not helpful to us as much anymore.
All right, one franchise that understands its fans especially well.
Wow, what's been awesome with regard to dealing with the fans. Not to brag, but I just spent 6 or 7 years on Ultraman, right? That was a Japanese superhero who had been absent from American popular culture for like 25 years.
I used to watch Ultraman when I was a kid.
Isn't that awesome? See? So you were what I had to work with coming onto the project. A bunch of guys with a little gray in their beard.
Or a lot of gray.
Were the only fans left, and the beauty of Tsuburaya Productions in Tokyo was they said, do whatever you think is best to cultivate new Ultraman fans in America as we bring the character back into the popular culture. And I went straight to those old men and I said, guys, let's bring them back. One more mission for us Ultraman.
Encore for Ultraman.
And they got together, man. It was wonderful. They reached out to their kids and their grandkids and helped echo anything that we talked about with them. I got to be their friend, and we worked together and as a kind of semi-celebrity for me to drop into chat rooms and Discord servers and things like that made everyone all excited. And so it was like a mission that spread and spread and spread. And now there are millions of Ultraman fans in the United States. So that was really, really satisfying to directly go and recruit apostles for Ultraman.
I could have been one of those. That would have been fun. That would have been a lot of fun. All right. So what's one thing you wish studios would stop doing immediately?
Please stop making war on your customers. Stop making war on your customers. Okay. So if someone doesn't like your movie, don't tell them that they're idiots or morons or even racists or they're being sexist. Because, yeah, there are always some of those. But there are also people who just don't like it, right? There is a filmic shortcut that happens a lot these days where the character suddenly becomes, is like nobody to start with. And within half an hour, they're an expert marksman. They use swords. They're chopping up the bad guys and so forth. That annoys audience members, particularly, I got to tell you, young adult men who in their minds understand that there needs to be a process, a rite of passage that enables the hero to earn their way into expertise. That a lot of the time that doesn't happen. So they complain. This girl character is beating up men, and that's ridiculous, and so forth. And then the actress will come and say, "You're." Or worse, right? They'll say something nasty to them, and then there's fighting. I tell the studios that the actors who are portraying powerful, iconic characters ought to, at least in the immediate run up and wake of the release, behave like that character. Lift yourself above the din. You don't have to go into X and start fighting with people. What good is that going to do either you, the people you're fighting with, or the movie? It's not going to do any good. Stop fighting with the customer. Let the customer understand the aspirational values of the character, and also make better stories. And you won't get that many complaints. So that's something that I've advised again and again. Various movie studios, video game companies, and even regular corporations. In our 10 Commandments, we talk about that in the book.
Okay, and that seems like a good way to wind down today's episode. So thank you to Jeff Gomez, who's been our guest. Thank you for joining us today, Jeff, on Stories from Real Life. I really enjoyed the stories you had to share.
Thank you, Melvin. I hope you got a little bit out of it.
I absolutely did. And just for the audience, hopefully you were paying attention. just in case you need a little reminder or a little prompt, don't forget to check out his works that we talked about today, Deep Down, his new crime thriller set in New York City subway system, his forthcoming book, The 10 Commandments of Corporate Narrative, and his work exploring AI called The Mythic Field. So that's it for today's episode of Stories from Real Life. Until next time, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
That was Stories from Real Life. Join us again next week for another great storytelling journey. See you next time.
Stories from Real Life is a production of Media Well Done, LLC.